I didn't look up when Brian's voice cut through the restaurant, but every word sliced straight through me. "You're a loser, Dad. Mom's new husband isn't." The laughter around us faded, and for a second, I heard nothing but my own heartbeat. I kept my hands still, my jaw locked, my silence heavy enough to choke on. They thought I was broken. But that silence wasn't surrender. It was the moment revenge began to breathe. "Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. You know how we do it here, real stories, real emotion. If you're ready to get lost in this one, click subscribe, drop your country or city in the comments, and stay tuned. Because tomorrow's story? It's going to hit even harder." I'd spent half the morning ironing a shirt I hadn't worn in 2 years. It was the one Evelyn bought me for our 10th anniversary, sky blue, smooth cotton, the kind that used to make her say I looked presentable enough to belong. I wasn't sure why I picked it. Maybe habit. Maybe some pathetic part of me still wanted to look like someone my son could be proud of. The mirror didn't lie, though. Lines around my eyes, a tired jaw, calloused hands that no amount of soap could smooth out. A mechanic's hands. A working man's hands. I pressed the collar one last time and told myself this dinner wasn't about pride. It was about Brian. When Evelyn called a week ago, she said, "Albert thought it might be nice for us all to have dinner together, for Brian's sake." Her voice was casual, too casual, and I could already hear the script behind it. Albert thought. Albert planned. Albert paid. Still, I said yes. I'd have said yes to anything that gave me an hour with my son. The restaurant was one of those sleek, quiet places where the waiters look like they're judging your income by your shoes. I felt it the moment I walked in, the hush of wealth, the faint smell of butter and white wine, the sound of polite laughter. I hadn't been in a place like this since before the divorce. They were already seated when I arrived. Evelyn looked radiant in her red dress, the kind that glowed under candlelight. Albert sat beside her, sharp suit, golden cufflinks, confidence leaking from every pore. Brian sat opposite them, scrolling his phone. His hair was longer than I remembered. "Patrick," Evelyn said, standing halfway. "You made it." I smiled. "Wouldn't miss it." Albert extended his hand with a smirk. "Good to see you, man." His grip was firm, too firm. "Heard business is steady?" That pause. That polite pity. I nodded once. "Steady enough." Evelyn's lips curled faintly, as if she'd been waiting for that answer. Brian didn't look up. "Hey, Dad." "Hey, champ," I said softly. "How's school?" He shrugged without meeting my eyes. "Fine." Silence fell like dust. The kind that doesn't settle, it lingers. We ordered. Evelyn dominated the conversation with stories about their new house, Albert's promotion, and their little getaway to Italy. Every sentence had a sparkle to it, like she was auditioning for approval. And every sparkle dimmed something inside me a little more. I kept nodding, smiling, cutting my steak in small, deliberate pieces. It wasn't the food I was tasting. It was the distance. The wall they'd built so high I couldn't see my own son on the other side of it. When Evelyn mentioned that Albert had just bought Brian a car for his 16th birthday, I forced a grin. "That's generous," I said. Albert laughed. "Well, the boy deserves it. He's got ambition, you know. Not afraid of success." His eyes flicked at me, just for a second, and I caught the meaning. Evelyn added softly, "It's good for him to have role models who think big." I sipped my water. It tasted like metal. Brian finally looked up, his expression unreadable. "Mom says you're still working at that old garage, right?" "Still there," I said. "Business is okay." He nodded, then looked away again. The conversation drifted back to Albert's investments, Evelyn's designer gallery opening, and Brian's plans for college. I listened, but I wasn't really there. My mind wandered to the days I'd picked Brian up from kindergarten in my old pickup. The way he'd jump into my arms, call me his hero. Somewhere between those memories and this dinner table, I'd lost him. By the time dessert came, my smile had grown mechanical. I stared at the soft glow of the table candles and thought about how silence can be armor. How, sometimes, saying nothing is the only thing keeping your pride from bleeding out. Evelyn laughed at something Albert said. Brian laughed too. I stared at my reflection in the wine glass, tired eyes, clenched jaw, and wondered when exactly I stopped being part of their laughter. When the waiter placed the check, Albert reached for it instantly, sliding his black card into the folder. Please, I said quietly. I can cover my part. Albert chuckled. Don't be ridiculous, Patrick. You're our guest. Evelyn's smile was thin, almost pitying. Let him, Patrick. It's not a big deal. I nodded. Sure. Not a big deal. But inside, it was. It always was. As we stood to leave, Brian lagged, still scrolling his phone. I placed my hand lightly on his shoulder. You okay, son? He shrugged me off. Yeah, fine. Evelyn looked over, annoyance flickering in her eyes. Don't start, Patrick. He's tired. Albert added with a grin, teenagers, right? They know everything. I smiled back, thinly. Yeah. They learn from the best. We walked toward the exit. Evelyn's perfume trailed behind her like a memory. Albert's laughter filled the space between us. Brian didn't look back once. Outside, the evening air was cool. The city hummed with life. Evelyn and Albert got into their car, a sleek black sedan that cost more than my garage's monthly rent. I watched the taillights fade into the distance until all that was left was their echo in my chest. For a long time, I just stood there on the sidewalk, my hands in my pockets, feeling the cold metal of my keys press against my palm. There are silences that break you. And there are silences that build something inside you, brick by brick, until it becomes unshakable. I didn't know it then, but that dinner, those small humiliations, those glances, those words, would be the last time I ever let anyone mistake my silence for weakness. Have you ever stayed silent just to keep the peace? Tell me below, what did that silence cost you? I'll be reading your comments. The thoughts of that dinner filled my heart and I vividly started remembering everything that happened earlier. Let me walk you through the humiliation I felt. I should have known something was coming. There was a kind of edge in Evelyn's laughter that night, too sharp, too practiced. The kind of laughter that fills a silence just to hide what's about to be said. We'd finished dinner, but the table wasn't empty. There were still crumbs, melting ice in glasses, and the bitter smell of coffee. Brian had been quieter since dessert, his shoulders tense, his fingers tapping the table. Evelyn kept giving him looks, little nudges, the kind parents give when they want their kid to say something rehearsed. Albert leaned back in his chair, arms slung over Evelyn's chair as if he owned the world. You know, Pat, he said, casual as a knife sliding from its sheath, you should consider expanding that garage of yours. Times are changing. Can't survive just fixing engines forever. I gave a small smile. Been surviving fine so far. Evelyn's eyes glimmered. He's just trying to help, Patrick. Albert's always had an eye for opportunity. That's why his company's doing so well. I nodded slowly. I'm sure it is. She twirled the stem of her wine glass between two fingers. I just wish Brian could see more examples of success around him. You know, ambition. That one hit hard. I stared at the flicker of the candle between us and said nothing. Albert chuckled, brushing invisible lint off his sleeve. Hey, nothing wrong with honest work. But I tell my guys all the time, you gotta think bigger. Set your sights high. He looked at me when he said hi. Brian exhaled sharply, his jaw tightening. Can we not do this right now? Evelyn frowned. Do what? Brian's eyes flicked from her to me, and something inside him cracked. Pretend. I straightened a little. Pretend what, Brian? He looked at me then, really looked. His face was red, his eyes wet, anger trembling just beneath the surface. Pretend that everything's fine. that you're fine. His voice rose, shaking the quiet of the restaurant. You're not, Dad. You're a loser. Every head turned. Forks froze midair. Evelyn's lips parted, half shock, half satisfaction. Albert leaned forward, feigning surprise but not hiding his smirk. Brian's voice broke again, louder now. Mom's new husband isn't a loser. He takes care of her. He takes care of me. He's successful. My throat burned, but no sound came out. I stared at him, my boy, the same kid who used to fall asleep on my shoulder after every little league game. For a second, I didn't even feel anger. Just emptiness. Evelyn reached for Brian's arm. Brian, that's enough. But he wasn't done. No, it's not enough. He acts like he's proud, but he's not. He's stuck in that stupid garage with grease under his nails like some loser from a movie. You said it yourself. Evelyn froze. Albert looked at her, brows raised. There it was. The truth slipping through their perfect performance. I inhaled slowly, the air thick with embarrassment, pity, and something darker. I could feel the stares from nearby tables. Someone whispered. Somewhere, a glass clinked. I wanted to scream, to flip the table, to tell Brian how many nights I stayed up fixing his bike when he was 10, how many weekends I missed sleep just to keep our house running after Evelyn left. But I didn't. I just looked at him. Looked at all of them. And then I smiled. Not a big one, just enough to confuse Evelyn. I see, I said quietly. Thanks for being honest, son. Brian's chest was heaving. I didn't. It's okay, I said. You're just saying what everyone else at this table already thinks. Evelyn's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Albert shifted uncomfortably. Patrick. I raised my hand. Don't. You've had your turn. I pushed my chair back slowly, stood, and pulled a few bills from my wallet. Laid them on the table next to my half-empty cup of coffee. For the tip, I said. Brian stared at me, guilt and defiance fighting for control in his eyes. I looked at him for one last long moment. One day, Brian, you'll understand what it costs a man to stay quiet. And then I walked out. The restaurant doors swung open, and the night air hit my face like a slap. I could still hear their voices behind me, muffled, frantic, arguing. Evelyn scolding. Albert trying to smooth things over. Brian shouting something I couldn't make out. But I didn't stop. I just kept walking. Down the block, the sound of my boots against the pavement steadied me. It was almost calming, like a rhythm I'd forgotten. People passed me, laughing couples, tired waiters, taxi drivers leaning on their horns. The world kept moving, uncaring. When I reached the corner, I stopped under the yellow glow of a streetlight. My hands were shaking, but not from sadness anymore. It was something colder. Clearer. The humiliation had burned out the noise inside me, leaving only a quiet, hard core of focus. They'd mistaken my silence for defeat. I pulled out my phone, stared at the lock screen, a photo of Brian when he was 8, grinning with 2 missing teeth, his arm wrapped around my neck. My throat tightened, but I didn't cry. I couldn't. I just whispered to that image, "Don't worry, kid. I'll fix this. I always fix what's broken." And right there, on that sidewalk, I made myself a promise. I wouldn't shout. I wouldn't argue. I wouldn't try to win them back. No, this time I'd teach them what silence can really do. If you were in my place, would you have stayed silent, or would you have said something? Tell me below, what would you have done at that table? The night after the dinner, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark with the TV off, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the house. The blue light from the street lamp spilled through the blinds, slicing the room into thin lines of shadow. The coffee on the table went cold hours ago, untouched. Every few minutes, I'd hear Brian's words again, not as sound, but as a weight in my chest. You're a loser, Dad. The words didn't fade. They multiplied. They echoed in the corners of my mind until they became something else, a heartbeat, a rhythm, a pulse of shame I couldn't escape. When the clock struck 2, I stood up, paced the small living room, and caught my reflection in the window. I looked like a ghost. Pale, hollow-eyed, small. That was the part that hurt most, not what he said, but how true it felt. Because somewhere along the line, I'd stopped fighting. Stopped proving. Stopped being the man I used to be. When Evelyn left, I told myself I'd rebuild. That I'd show her I could stand without her. But life doesn't clap when you survive, it just keeps asking for more. The bills stacked. The garage slowed. I worked 12-hour days fixing strangers' cars while Evelyn posed for photos in designer dresses, and Brian smiled beside her like I'd never existed. By 3 in the morning, I poured whiskey into my coffee and drank it straight. The burn was better than silence. The next morning, I dragged myself to the garage. The smell of oil and metal usually calmed me, but not that day. My hands wouldn't steady. I stripped a bolt, cursed, slammed the wrench down. Rough night? It was Frank, an old friend who'd worked beside me for years. Big guy, gruff voice, heart of gold. Something like that, I muttered. He studied me, then said quietly, "That bad, huh?" I didn't answer. Frank leaned against the workbench. "You know, Pat, I've seen that look before." "What look?" "The look of a man who's been buried alive but hasn't realized he can still dig his way out." I gave a bitter laugh. "Feels like I'm already 6 feet under." He wiped his hands on a rag and looked at me like he was deciding whether to say what came next. "You can stay down there, or you can remember who the hell you are." I looked up at him. He pointed at the half-finished car in the bay. "You fix things for a living, man. Maybe it's time you fix your own story." Something in me cracked open. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. That night, I went home and opened my laptop, an old one, slow and glitchy, but still alive. I didn't know what I was looking for, not at first. I just typed Albert Construction Holdings into the search bar. News articles. Business profiles. Interviews. All full of the same smug photo, Albert shaking hands with politicians, smiling with that clean, toothy grin that made my skin crawl. A headline caught my eye: "City contracts awarded amid ethics concerns." I clicked. The article mentioned anonymous complaints about shady deals, safety violations, and misused funds. Nothing proven. Nothing concrete. But there was a thread. I followed it. For hours, I read, cross-referenced, took notes. I didn't even notice when the sun rose. By dawn, I had a small pile of printed pages and a strange kind of calm humming in my chest. It wasn't about money. Or even Evelyn anymore. It was about something purer. Balance. They'd stripped me of pride in front of my son. They'd painted me small, invisible. Now, I'd remind them what happens when the quiet man starts paying attention. That week, I worked like a machine. Fixed cars. Smiled at customers. Ate alone. At night, I dug deeper. Contracts, financial statements, shell companies, all the little cracks in Albert's perfect empire. Frank noticed the change. "Whatever you're doing," he said one evening, "it's either going to save you or destroy you." I smiled faintly. Maybe both. Brian didn't call. Not once. But that hurt less than it used to. The ache was still there, a dull, steady throb, but it no longer felt like the center of me. One night, about a month after the dinner, I drove by Evelyn's neighborhood. Their lights were on, warm and golden. I could see silhouettes through the curtains, Brian at the table, Albert laughing, Evelyn pouring wine. It should have hurt. But all I felt was distance. They were living in a glass house, and I had just found the first crack. I rolled down the window, lit a cigarette, something I hadn't done in years, and whispered to myself, "You shouldn't have underestimated the quiet one." For the first time since that dinner, I smiled. Not out of joy. Out of certainty. Because revenge doesn't start with rage. It starts with patience. And I had plenty of that. If someone shattered your dignity the way they did mine, would you try to rebuild, or would you make them feel it? Tell me below what you think justice should look like. It started with a folder. Just a plain brown one I found in the bottom drawer of my desk at the garage. I wrote A on the tab with a black marker and slid the first few printouts inside. I didn't call it revenge yet. I told myself it was research. But every night, that folder got thicker. I wasn't a hacker or a detective, just a man with time and purpose. I learned where to look: public records, corporate filings, social media footprints. Albert's company left trails everywhere: shell LLCs, property purchases under different names, fake invoices paid to consultants. The more I found, the calmer I felt. People think revenge burns hot, but that's wrong. The real kind, the kind that lasts, is cold and careful. It's an engine, and I know engines. Frank started to notice. "You're lighter," he said one afternoon as we closed up shop. "Maybe I'm just done being the punching bag." He grinned. About time. But even he didn't know what I was doing after hours. One Friday night, I drove into the city. Parked a few blocks from Evelyn and Albert's firm's downtown office. The building was all glass and light, the kind of place that made men like Albert feel immortal. I sat in the car for almost half an hour, just watching people come and go. Men in suits, women in heels, all with that polished, untouchable look. Then I got out, walked into a diner across the street, ordered coffee, and opened my laptop. I connected to the building's guest Wi-Fi, unsecured, because arrogance makes people sloppy. From there, I followed a link from a subcontractor's public portfolio to an internal document left open. It listed project names, payment schedules, and a few suspicious transactions. Duplicate invoices, padded labor hours, materials fees that didn't match market prices. I screenshotted everything. Each discovery felt like turning a key. Back home, I cross-checked the names. Most of them were fake. But two weren't. Both belonged to city officials. The next week, I visited City Hall under the pretense of renewing my business license. While waiting in line, I recognized one of the names on the paperwork: Douglas Price, one of Albert's consultants. The man himself walked by, flashy suit, fake smile, shaking hands. I watched him closely. The way he avoided eye contact with a woman from finance. The nervous twitch when she mentioned inspection forms. People reveal themselves in small moments. That night, I wrote everything down. Every connection, every hint, every thread. By mid-month, I had enough to build a map, literal lines connecting Albert's firm to city contracts, to Price, to the mayor's committee. It wasn't bulletproof yet. But it was alive. I thought of Brian sometimes while working on it. Wondered if he'd still think Albert was such a hero if he saw what kind of rot that hero stood on. Then I'd feel that old ache in my chest, not anger, not pity, just the dull pulse of fatherhood refusing to die. One evening, while sorting through more data, Frank knocked on the garage door long after closing. "Pat, you here?" "Yeah." He stepped in, looked at the papers spread across my workbench. "Jesus. What are you building, man, a car or a conspiracy?" I smiled thinly. "Something in between." He frowned. "I know that look. You're planning something big." "Big enough," I said. He hesitated. "Just, don't let it eat you." I looked him in the eye. "It already did. I'm just shaping what's left." He didn't press further. The next morning, I mailed an anonymous envelope to a local investigative journalist, a woman named Clara Wells. She had a reputation for digging deep, for not backing down. Inside, I included the first batch of documents and a note. "If you want corruption, start here. Follow the money. A friend." It felt good, sealing that envelope. Like the first spark in a long-dead engine. A week later, the story broke online: city contracts under scrutiny, anonymous source exposes misused funds. I watched the article spread from local feeds to evening news. Albert's firm was mentioned in the second paragraph, not accused, just referenced. Enough to rattle him. The following night, Evelyn called me. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. "Patrick," she started, voice tight, "what's this story about Albert's company?" "He's furious." I feigned confusion. "Story? Don't play dumb. You had something to do with it, didn't you?" I laughed softly. "Evelyn, if I had that kind of power, do you think I'd still be fixing cars?" She went silent. "Good night, Evelyn," I said, and hung up. When I set the phone down, my hands trembled, not from guilt, but from adrenaline. The plan was working. The silence was finally speaking for me. A few days later, Brian texted for the first time in months. "Mom's freaking out. Albert's angry all the time. Did you do something?" I stared at the message for a long time before typing back. "No, son. Sometimes people just get caught in the mess they make." He didn't reply. But I knew he'd read it. Each night, I kept digging. Clara released follow-ups, uncovering hidden payments and falsified safety reports. It spread fast. Albert's company stock started dipping. Evelyn's smiles on social media disappeared. For the first time in years, I felt in control. Not powerful, just aligned. Because revenge, I realized, isn't about making them bleed. It's about balance. About watching the scales tip back, one quiet ounce at a time. The funny thing about revenge is that it changes your eyes. You start noticing things you used to overlook: words, pauses, patterns. When Evelyn and I were married, I thought I knew her language. I could tell when she was happy, when she was lying, when she was somewhere else in her mind. I just didn't realize how long she'd been gone before she walked out. It was a quiet Sunday morning when I decided to look back, not at her, but at us. I opened the old box of paperwork I'd shoved in the closet years ago. Divorce documents. Tax returns. Bank statements. Things I hadn't wanted to touch. Halfway through the stack, I noticed a file with Albert's company name on it. Dated 2 years before Evelyn left me. A subcontractor payment for consulting services. Her signature was at the bottom. Mine wasn't. That single piece of paper changed everything. I sat there for a long time, the paper trembling in my hands, the edges curling from my grip. So she'd been involved in his company before she ever admitted they'd met. I checked the date again. Brian would have been 12. I remember that year, the distance between us, the late-night girls' dinners she said were just networking. I'd been too tired to question it then. But now, it was all so clear. The affair hadn't been born after our marriage ended. It had been planted inside it. And she'd watered it with my trust. I laughed, a small, broken sound. The kind that doesn't carry joy, only disbelief. By that afternoon, I was back at my laptop. I traced the document's company ID, cross-referenced Albert's client list, and found something buried deep in archived public records. Evelyn's signature appeared on several transaction reports tied to an early project of Albert's that had gone missing from his company's portfolio. The project had been quietly written off as a failed investment. But the timeline didn't match. It was financed while Evelyn and I were still filing joint taxes. Meaning she'd used our money. My money. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was theft, deceit, and humiliation all dressed as love. My phone buzzed. Frank again. "You've been ghosting me," he said when I answered. "You okay?" I hesitated. "Yeah. I'm better than okay." He paused. "That's what worries me." I smiled. "You ever hear of poetic justice, Frank?" He sighed. "Whatever you're planning, just remember you still have a kid who's watching." That stuck. Not because it softened me, but because it reminded me who I was doing this for. Brian deserved to know the truth. He didn't need a saint for a father, he just needed to see that silence doesn't mean weakness. So I changed my strategy. It was no longer just about Albert's corruption. I was going to burn their false story, the successful new life they'd built on lies, from the inside out. I started with Evelyn. Through some of her old email logins, yes, I still had access. She'd never changed the password. I found correspondence with Albert dating back years before our divorce. Messages full of flattery, deals disguised as friendship. And then one, from her to him. Patrick won't notice. He's too proud to ask questions. I read it 3 times. Every ounce of pity I'd once felt for her vanished. My chest went cold. My pulse steady. That night, I wrote a message, anonymous again, to Clara, the journalist. I gave her the next puzzle piece, proof that Evelyn had funneled money from our joint account into Albert's company, which was now under investigation. When the story updated, Evelyn's name wasn't front page, but it was there. A source connected to the company's early investors, a careful phrase that said everything without saying it outright. By the next morning, her world started to wobble. I knew because she showed up at my garage. It was raining, gray and heavy. She stepped in wearing that same expensive coat she used to flaunt, but her eyes looked tired. "Patrick, what the hell did you do?" she demanded. I wiped my hands on a rag, not looking up. "Morning, Evelyn. Don't play games with me. You're behind this." "I know you are." I shrugged. "Behind what?" "I fix engines, remember?" "Don't you dare," she hissed. "You think this will make Brian respect you again? Ruining us?" I met her gaze finally, calm, even. "Respect isn't something you ruin, Evelyn. It's something you lose when you lie." She flinched, just a fraction, but I saw it. For the first time, she looked small in that garage. Like all the polish had peeled away. "You'll regret this," she said, voice trembling with anger. "Maybe," I said. "But not tonight." She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The echo lingered long after she was gone. I stood there, staring at the oil-stained floor, and whispered to myself, now she knows what silence sounds like when it starts to roar. Outside, thunder cracked like punctuation. I didn't plan to reach out to Brian. But when Evelyn showed up at the garage, angry and afraid, I knew the next move was his. The only way to finish this cleanly was through him. So, 2 days later, I texted. "Dinner? Just us. Anywhere you want." He replied after half an hour. "Why now?" I stared at the screen for a moment before typing back. "Because I owe you better than silence." He agreed to meet. We chose a small place outside town, no cameras, no gossip, no chance of running into Evelyn or Albert. When he walked in, I barely recognized him. Taller. Older. Still carrying the anger in his shoulders. "Hey, Dad," he said flatly. I nodded. "Brian." He sat. No hug, no warmth. Just space between us and a plate of untouched food. For the first few minutes, I let the silence stretch. He shifted, uncomfortable. People always talk too soon, they reveal too much. Silence forces truth to surface. Finally, he said, "Mom says you're trying to ruin Albert." I met his eyes. "Do you believe her?" He hesitated. "I don't know. She's scared. And he's different lately. Always tense." "Maybe that's who he really is," I said quietly. Brian looked down. "Did you do it?" I leaned back. "What do you think?" "I think you're smarter than people give you credit for," he said after a pause. That caught me off guard, but I didn't show it. "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe I just learned to stop letting people spit in my food and call it love." He frowned. "You sound bitter." "Truth usually does." He didn't answer, just stared at the table. When the waiter came, I ordered for both of us, the same meal he used to love as a kid. He didn't touch it. "Why'd you ask me to come?" he said finally. "Because I want you to see something for yourself. Not from your mother. Not from him." He narrowed his eyes. See what? How lies look when the light hits them. I slid a flash drive across the table. Small, silver, harmless looking. What's that? Proof, I said simply. Proof of what? Everything, I said. Take it. Don't tell them you have it. He didn't move at first. Then his fingers brushed the metal. What's on it? He asked. Emails. Transactions. Dates. The truth about when it all started. He looked at me, confusion flickering into fear. You mean? Yes. Before the divorce. Before you ever met him. He went pale. You're lying. I tilted my head. Check it if you think I am. He stared at the flash drive, then pocketed it. I didn't press further. The silence did the work. When the check came, I paid. As he stood, he said, "Why are you doing this, Dad?" I met his gaze. Because sometimes the only way to teach people what they've done is to let them watch it fall apart. He didn't reply. He just nodded slowly, like a piece of him finally understood something but didn't want to admit it. When he walked out, I stayed a while longer, finishing my drink. Calm. Empty. Certain. That flash drive wasn't just evidence, it was the trigger. Once Brian opened it, once he saw what Evelyn and Albert really were, it wouldn't just destroy them publicly. It would rot them from the inside, through their own son's eyes. That was the point. Revenge isn't fire, it's frost. And tonight, I'd made the first crack in the ice. I didn't have to wait long. 2 nights after dinner, Brian called. No greeting, just a single word, "Why?" Hissed through the phone. Why what? I asked. You knew. You knew they were lying. His breathing was ragged. I saw the emails. The transfers. The dates. God, Dad, she was with him while she was still with you. I let the silence sit. You could have told me, he shouted. I tried, I said evenly. You just weren't ready to hear it. He hung up. I didn't call back. I didn't need to. That kind of truth doesn't vanish, it festers. The next day, I parked near their house. I told myself it was curiosity, but that was a lie. I wanted to hear it break. From the street, their voices carried through an open window. Brian's first, "Hi," shaking with fury. How long, Mom? How long were you sleeping with him before you left Dad? Evelyn's tone wavered. Brian, you don't understand. Don't lie to me. I read everything. A pause. Then Albert's voice, low and defensive, Brian, you're out of line. Out of line? Brian snapped. You stole money from Dad. You used him. And you, the sound of something shattering, maybe a glass, maybe their perfect illusion. Evelyn cried out. Stop yelling. You don't know what he was like back then. I could picture her, the trembling hands, the victim mask she wore so well. Brian's voice cracked. No, I know exactly what he was like. He worked himself to death for us while you were out building your next life. I closed my eyes. The words landed harder than I expected. Inside, another crash. A door slammed. Footsteps thundered. Then quiet, the kind of quiet that means everything has changed. When Brian finally came out, he looked hollow. He didn't see me in the car. He just walked down the street, fists clenched, eyes wet, moving fast like someone who'd lost the map of his own family. I watched him disappear into the night. Back inside, the lights in the house flickered on and off. Evelyn's silhouette moved from room to room. Albert followed, gesturing wildly. The perfect couple unraveling in real time. I should have felt triumph. I'd waited months for this, years, if I was honest. But watching it happen, it didn't feel like fire. It felt like gravity. Heavy. I'd pulled their world down, and now it was just falling. My phone buzzed again. A text from Brian. You were right. I'm sorry. For a moment, I almost replied. Something simple, it's okay, son. But then I stopped. Because this wasn't about comfort. Not yet. They needed to sit in it first. To drown in what they'd built. From the car, I watched the lights in their house dim one by one. Evelyn sat on the porch steps eventually, head in her hands. Albert stormed out a few minutes later, keys jangling, driving off too fast. The quiet that followed wasn't peace, it was the sound of something ending. I started the engine, let the hum settle into a low growl. The rain began to fall again, soft and steady. Revenge, I realized, isn't loud. It's the quiet after the scream. It's standing outside the ruins, and knowing you don't have to go in. I pulled away, the wipers sweeping rhythmically, the road stretching ahead like a clean slate. Behind me, their house grew smaller, darker, until it was nothing but a smudge of light swallowed by rain. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. Some victories don't need applause. They just need silence. When you've already burned the bridge, the only question left is whether to salt the ashes. A week has passed since the confrontation. Brian stopped answering calls. Evelyn disappeared from social media. Albert made the mistake of showing up at my garage. He walked in like he owned the place. Same smug posture, same pressed shirt. "You happy now?" he said. "You've ruined your son's relationship with his mother." I wiped my hands on a rag and met his eyes. Didn't take much. Just the truth. He sneered. "You think you won? You're pathetic, Patrick. You'll always be a failure." I smiled slightly. "Maybe. But you should check your email." He frowned. "What?" "Check your email," I repeated. He pulled out his phone, annoyed. Then the color drained from his face. Because at that exact moment, every major investor, every client, and every board member of his company received a copy of the files I'd kept, proof of his embezzlement, fraud, and the false reports he'd used to inflate profits. The evidence was airtight. I'd waited until the quarterly audit. Perfect timing. Albert looked up, voice trembling. You can't prove any of this came from me." "Actually," I said, "I can. Your signatures are on every single one." He took a step forward. "You'll go down too, you know that?" "I already did," I said softly. "That's how I know how to survive it." He left without another word. The sound of his tires screeching out of the lot was almost musical. 2 days later, the news broke. Albert was suspended. His accounts frozen. The company's stock plummeted overnight. His name trended, not as a genius entrepreneur, but as a fraud and a thief. Evelyn's phone calls to me came next. I didn't answer the first 5. On the 6th, I picked up. "Patrick," she sobbed, "you have to stop this." "I didn't start it," I said. "He's ruined. You've destroyed everything." I leaned back, calm. "Everything we built together? You did that years ago." "Brian won't talk to me," she whispered. "He hates me now." The pause that followed felt endless. "He doesn't hate you," I said finally. "He just finally sees you." She cried harder. "Please, Patrick. Please, don't do this anymore." I didn't answer. I let the silence fill the space until she hung up. That night, I drove past their house again. Albert's car was gone. Evelyn's lights were off. The porch that once held summer dinners and laughter was empty. Brian was sitting on the curb outside. When he saw my car, he stood up. "Dad," he said quietly, stepping closer. "It's over, isn't it?" "Almost," I replied. He nodded slowly. "He's finished. Mom, she's not doing well." I looked at him. "And you?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I don't even know what family means anymore." I exhaled. It's what's left when truth's done cutting. He looked away. "Did you have to do it this way?" "Yes," I said. Because sometimes the only justice left is balance. He nodded again, silent. Then he turned and walked away. I didn't follow. When I got home, I poured a drink and sat in the dark. On my desk, the last file blinked, confirmation that Albert's accounts were frozen, his assets seized, his public life obliterated. Everything was done. The man who stole my family, my money, and my peace now had nothing. Evelyn had lost the image she had built her life around. Brian had the truth, raw and permanent. It wasn't happiness. But it was balanced. People think revenge feels like victory. It doesn't. It feels like silence, clean, cold, absolute. I stared at the empty glass, then at the faint reflection of myself in the window. Who's the loser now? I whispered. And for the first time in years, the silence didn't hurt. There's a strange stillness that follows justice, not the kind they write laws about, but the kind you build with your own hands. Weeks passed. The noise faded. The headlines about Albert's collapse were replaced by newer scandals, fresher gossip. His company was gone, his reputation shredded. The man who once looked at me like I was nothing had become a name people whispered like a warning. Evelyn sold the house. She moved out quietly, avoiding everyone who used to matter. I didn't bother asking where. Some endings don't need an audience. Brian came by the garage one evening. I was closing up when I saw him standing by the door, older somehow, steadier. "Hey," he said. "Hey," I replied, wiping my hands. He looked around the place. "You fixed the old Camaro." "Finally," I said. "Took some patience." He nodded, half smiling. "Guess patience pays off." We stood in silence for a bit, the air thick with things we didn't need to say. "I heard Mom's gone," he said softly. "Yeah. And Albert?" "Facing trial. Won't see daylight for a while." He nodded again. "Good." Then, after a long pause, he added, "I hated you for a long time, Dad. I thought you were weak. But you weren't." I met his eyes. "No. I was just quiet." He kicked at a pebble. "I get that now. We didn't hug. We didn't need to." But when he walked closer and leaned against the car beside me, shoulder to shoulder, it was enough. For a long while, we just stood there, watching the last orange line of the sun bleed over the horizon. The kind of sunset that doesn't promise anything, it just is. "You ever regret it?" he asked. I thought about it. The years I'd lost. The weight I'd carried. The faces I'd learned to stop missing. "No," I said finally. "I regret trusting the wrong people. But the rest? No. This was the only way." He nodded, eyes on the sky. "I get that too." When he left, I watched his taillights fade into the distance, steady and sure. That night, for the first time in years, I slept without dreams. The next morning, I walked to the river behind the garage, the same one I used to fish at with Brian when he was little. The air was cold, the water slow and dark. I took the last file, the one that started it all, and dropped it in. The pages spread, soaked, then sank. There was no rage left, no hunger. Just stillness. I'd spent so long holding my pain that I forgot what it felt like to let it go. Revenge had done its work. It didn't heal me, healing isn't its job, but it cleared the path. Now there was space for something else. I walked back up the path to the garage. The morning light caught the metal tools, the dust floating like silver mist. It looked almost peaceful. I unlocked the front door, turned the sign to open, and let the day begin. Later that afternoon, a customer came in, an older man with a busted radiator and a kind smile. As I worked, he talked about his grandkids, his garden, small things that didn't hurt to hear. When he left, he said, "You seem like someone who's been through a lot." I smiled. "You could say that." After he drove off, I leaned against the workbench and exhaled. People think revenge destroys you. Maybe it does, if you let it consume you. But if you do it right, if you finish it clean, it just clears the noise. I wasn't the same man who'd sat in that restaurant swallowing shame. I wasn't the loser my son had called me. I was the man who'd found balance. And in that balance, I found peace. If you were Patrick, betrayed, humiliated, erased, would you have stopped at truth, or gone all the way like he did? Let me know in the comments below. What does justice mean to you, forgiveness, or the fall of the guilty? Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as entertaining and even more intriguing as can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.